Okay, everyone, so this is a continuation from my last video entitled My Comparative Religion Class. I realized that video, ended in kind of a weird way because I realized I'd run out of time. So if you haven't watched that video, then you need to go watch that video, or else this is going to make no sense because this is me telling a story and you're coming in at a point where it was a a transition in the story. But yeah, so after I had this experience with my comparative religion class, where I was sort of shocked by this by what I was studying with mythology as religion. And so, I had gone on and I had read all about Greco-Roman, Mesopotamian, Egyptian mythology, and then I wanted to know more about the actual religions behind these mythologies. So then I checked out a book, a 3-volume book entitled "The History of Religious Ideals" by Maurice Alati, who is sort of like one of the big scholars of comparative religion. I mean, he's with him, Houston Smith and Karen Armstrong. I mean, these are kind of like the big people. And I read his whole trilogy, and he documents religion as a historian from basically the Paleolithic period all the way up to, I think his book ends with the rise of Tibetan Buddhism and I think the Reformation. It might be the Enlightenment. I forget now. But he doesn't get all the way to here, as I believe he passed away before he could finish it. But anyway, and so I started looking at these the mythologies as religions, and I was seeing a lot of commonalities between not only their stories, but I could see sort of the seeds into future concepts, which I'll probably talk about in more detail in the future. But as it pertains, like I said, the title of this video is called, the Exodus Project. And what I mean by that, as I mentioned in the last video, is I asked myself this honest question. Because, see, with regards to the Noah story, as it appears in other cultures, I really, from my current perspective, or at least my perspective then in that class, the first couple of weeks of the class, and when I had heard this, I wasn't unfamiliar with this idea that there were myth stories about a flood that occurs beyond the Abrahamic traditions. And so I had rationalized this by thinking to myself, well, Noah isn't really placed in a historical context. In other words, the Bible, the Quran, and to boot, these other myths don't put this flood story in a place in history. And what I mean by that is that you can't cross-reference the flood. I mean, when you're thinking about, if you tell a story, let's say I tell a story and I mention that it's 1994, Idaho, United States of America, you can think to yourself, okay, so everything, unless it's a parallel universe or something in the story, you know where this is happening. There is no historical references, from my understanding, in the Noah story in both the Bible and the Quran. And so I was able to rationalize it like this. I thought to myself, well, since there's no historicity really attached to it, all these myths, all these stories could just be basically talking about this one event in history, Noah and the flood. And that's how I was able to rationalize away the fact that every culture has a flood story and has certain variations. I just thought, well, whatever. And I really sincerely just thought it's not that big of a deal. Well, the Moses thing is different. And I think, having said what I've said about the Noah and the flood thing, I think you all know where I'm getting at with the Moses thing. Moses is rooted in history. And so much so that you have historical references in the Bible, in the Quran, and in the works of Muslim, Christian, Jewish, and secular historians. You have references to this, in that people are discussing this as a historical event, the Exodus in the life of Moses. And so when I thought to myself, okay, well, if the infancy story of Moses really isn't that original, in other words, this is an idea, this is a motif that exists in all these different places, what about the rest of his life? And what about the events of the Exodus? Now, this may shock people too, is, in my naivety, I took the Exodus story for granted. I really sincerely didn't bother to check the historicity of the Exodus. And now I'm sure tons of people now are either A, shocked or laughing right now. You know, but I have to confess this. I took it for granted. I thought, well, of course the Exodus story happened. I mean, you know, it's one of those things. You hear it so often growing up, and since I used to be a Christian, I'm now a Muslim. It was not something that I thought, well, why wouldn't, you know, of course, you know. And so I started doing research into the Exodus story, and I own books on Egyptian history. I own books that talk about Egyptian mythology, and I started poking around these texts of history that I have, and I found that there really isn't any historical evidence for the Exodus story at all. And I found this to be a major... Now, when I say there's no history, I mean there's no evidence for it. Absolutely none. And I was just really surprised by this, because surely such an event that transpired, as the Bible and the Quran both document, surely this must have happened in history. And I was shocked that there just isn't. There is no evidence for the Exodus. In a nutshell. I mean, I could go into details about this, but you know, in a nutshell, there is no historical evidence for it. Now, there's different theories about the Exodus. There are people who have said that, you know, the Jewish scholars and historians have placed the Exodus happening at a certain time period. When you look at the time periods that the Talmud, the Midrash, and other Jewish historians, when they sort of postulate when this event occurred, you find that it actually happens during the reign of Akhenaten. And he was a pharaoh who basically was famous for starting proto-monotheism in Egypt. He abolished polytheism. He set up this cult of worshiping one god, and that he was the son of God, or the divine pharaoh, who was the sort of the in-between between the people and this one god. And if it's true that Moses was around during that time, as other scholars, I'm not the only person who's come up with this. I'm talking about scholars like, you know, even Sigmund Freud, for crying out loud, wrote a book on this. This changes the story completely. If this is true, if we go with the postulation of Jewish historians and other historians, then this isn't a battle between polytheism versus monotheism. This is a battle between basically two forms of tribal monotheism that existed if we go with the Bible. And so I was having problems with that. Now, a lot of people say that it was Ramses II because the Bible says that it's Ramses. Now, many Muslim scholars, and I've looked at tafsirs, I've looked at, not really tafsirs in particular, but like commentaries, so I guess modern tafsirs, and like websites like IslamicAwareness.org, which I've gone to for a lot of advice, and used it in a lot of my videos, and I found that they sort of follow the Jewish Christian secular historian track of saying, rather, it's Ramses II. That is the popular thing. And, you know, Charlton Heston's movie, The Ten Commandments, that is the popular thing. It was Ramses II. But there's no evidence for that either. During Ramses' reign, there's no evidence of him drowning in a flood, or excuse me, drowning in the Red Sea. In fact, I couldn't find any evidence for a pharaoh drowning in the Red Sea, period. And the idea that Ramses had this great exodus, because the one thing about Ramses' reign that's rather unique is that it's well documented. There's documentation of his wars, of his expansions, of his empire, of his him conquering the lands and the tribute, and we know a lot about you know the religious systems that were happening. And this isn't just unique to Ramses; it happens in a lot of different pharaohs' reigns. And there is no evidence of someone leaving, people leaving. I recently had come upon an article, an archaeological article that had talked about that when people worked for the Egyptians as laborers, so i.e. the people that probably built the pyramids, they were buried with honor. They were looked at as skilled craftsmen. So we really don't actually have evidence of them abusing minority workers to do the work for them. And the consensus of the majority of Egyptologists is there just isn't enough evidence. There just isn't. There's a void of evidence to say, yes, the Exodus for sure happened. Now, I'm going to make subsequent blog posts and videos because I realize that there are articles by Muslim websites that have attempted to address this question of the historicity of the Exodus, and I've reviewed them and I've done notes on them, and I will probably, in the form of blog posts via articles of my own, I will probably be talking about the historicity of the Exodus in more detail with some of these websites and their responses. I'm doing my term paper in my comparative religion class on this very topic, the historicity of the Exodus. And so this is going to be going on with me for the next couple months. So I'm going to be sharing my continued findings and flesh out what I'm trying to say as a summary in this video. But let me get to the cut to the chase. Why is this a problem for me personally? And I want to be very clear in this video. I am not saying that people have to agree with me. I'm not saying it. In fact, if you want to think that this is all a bunch of BS and that it doesn't matter that there's no historical evidence, that's totally fine too. This is just for me. I can't stress this enough. This is my own personal problem. Is that if you haven't noticed, with my take on Christianity and my critiques of Christian theology, I criticize it based on history. And many people love those videos. That, oh, there's no historical evidence for this, so therefore I can't accept this. And I realized that this realization I'm having that I had and am having with the Exodus story made me realize that I would be a hypocrite if on one hand I would criticize Judaism, Christianity for this, on this level, but not leave it open to other areas. That would make me a hypocrite. And so I realized I couldn't continue this biased way of viewing things. So it left me with three choices that I found, that I consider three choices. One was I need to rethink my entire religious identity, and wherever that might lead me, because obviously my standards include not only faith, but being able to back it up by other means, whether science or history, etc., psychology. The second is that basically I do the dishonest thing and continue being dishonest, but I can't be dishonest. I really do mean this on a personal level. I want to be honest with seeking the truth, as subjective or objective as that might be. And I didn't want to say, okay, well, the second option really was, okay, well, I would have to sort of take down all those videos I did on Christianity and then let Christianity speak for itself without looking through the lens of a historian of religion. And so it was this idea of, do I, abandon all those videos, which many of you have thanked me for. And I do think that they're important to criticize. Where's the historical evidence for the Dawn of the Dead in the New Testament? Where is any of this stuff? And they're important things to ask when you're looking at history and archaeology. So do I just abandon all that, and then therefore Christianity actually has a lot more weight to it? I could do that. But the third one was, should I take these things literally? Does it really matter when it comes to personal faith if I take the story of Moses literally, like it literally happened? Or can I say to myself, maybe the symbolism, the symbolic nature of the story, what does the story of the Exodus really mean on a metaphorical, symbolic level? Is that not an appropriate way to perhaps view these things that we aren't really sure happened in history, but maybe that's not the point? And I feel that that third choice is the best thing for me right now. To view a lot of these things on a symbolic level, to view large pieces of scripture. I'm just not talking about the Abrahamic stuff. Other religions' texts as well, on a meaning of psychosymbolic level, a psychological symbolic level. And this is a form of viewing comparative religion called symbolic formism, which is you view things on a symbolic level, and which I'll be describing in more detail in future videos. But at this point, I'm going to end here because I feel like this is sort of where I'm at right now, what I'm considering. I will be posting blogs on I will be doing articles on my blog to talk about very specific aspects of this study I'm doing on the Exodus. So stay tuned for that. And in future videos, I'll talk about my sort of perhaps growing perspective in more detail, in what I mean by symbolism in future videos. So thank you for sticking with me. I hope to get some interesting conversation out of this. Again, this is my own personal journey that I'm experiencing right now, and I don't mean to be preachy, or I'm not trying to convince anybody. I'm simply trying to deal with myself. So thank you everyone for watching. Assalamu alaikum. Peace be with you all.